The bullet tore through the saloon window. The same moment, Xavier Crawford stepped inside, sending glass raining down like crystal tears. And he knew without turning that death had followed him all the way from Denver. He dove behind the bar as 3 more shots rang out, splintering the wood above his head. The bartender, a grizzled man with more scars than teeth, barely flinched. "You bring trouble with you, mister?" the bartender asked, voice flat. Xavier did not answer. He pulled his revolver and fired twice through the broken window, then ran through the back door into the harsh Utah sun. Marysvale stretched before him, a collection of weathered buildings and dusty streets nestled in the Sevier Valley. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still white with spring snow despite it being April of 1878. He had come here to disappear, to lose himself in a town small enough that his past might not find him. That plan had lasted exactly 3 minutes. The men chasing him were bounty hunters, though Xavier had committed no crime beyond surviving when his wife had not. They wanted him for a debt he had refused to pay, money owed to a man in Denver who had no right to it. But debts in the West had a way of becoming death sentences, and honor meant little when gold was involved. Xavier ran between 2 buildings, his boots kicking up red dust. His lungs burned. He had been riding for 2 weeks straight, sleeping rough, eating less. The fever had taken Mary exactly 1 year and 2 months ago, and since then he had been moving, always moving, as if he could outrun the grief that stalked him worse than any bounty hunter ever could. He pressed his back against the side of a general store, breathing hard, listening. Footsteps. 2 men, maybe 3. They were spread out, hunting him methodically. Xavier checked his gun. 4 bullets left. He had more ammunition in his saddlebags, but his horse was tied up outside the saloon, and he would never make it back there alive. "Come out, Crawford," a voice shouted. "Make this easy." Xavier closed his eyes. Mary's face appeared behind his eyelids, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her smile gentle. She had died in his arms, burning up with fever, delirious and calling for their daughter who had died at birth 3 years before that. He had held her and felt her slip away, and the world had turned gray and empty. Everything since had been mechanical, breathing, eating, riding, existing without living. The footsteps grew closer. Xavier tensed, ready to fight, ready to die if that was how this ended. He had nothing left to lose anyway. Then a door opened beside him, and a hand grabbed his shirt and yanked him sideways. He stumbled into darkness, into what smelled like a storeroom full of flour and dried goods. The door shut silently. A woman's voice, barely a whisper, said, "Be quiet." Xavier's eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through cracks in the wooden walls. The woman stood pressed against the door, listening. She was perhaps 30, with auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a simple gray dress with a white apron. Her face was all angles and determination, pretty in a way that seemed almost accidental, as if she had no time to think about such things. Her green eyes flicked to him, assessing, then back to the door. Outside, the footsteps paused. "You see anyone run through here?" a rough voice asked. "No." Another voice, belonging to someone just outside. "Check the store." The woman pressed harder against the door, her jaw set. Xavier raised his gun, ready to shoot if they came through, but she shook her head fiercely. The door handle rattled. Xavier held his breath. "It's locked," the bounty hunter said. "Nobody here." The footsteps moved away. The woman stayed frozen for another full minute before she finally exhaled and stepped back. She looked at Xavier, really looked at him, and something passed across her face. Recognition, not of him, but of something in him. "Thank you," Xavier said quietly. "They will keep looking," she said. Her voice was steady, controlled. "You should stay here until dark. I can't ask you to risk yourself for me. You did not ask, I offered. She moved past him deeper into the storeroom, and he followed. It was larger than he had thought, extending back into what must have been the rear of the building. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with goods. A small desk sat in the corner with a ledger open on it. She gestured to a chair. Sit. You look half dead. Xavier wanted to argue, but she was right. He sank into the chair, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. The woman disappeared through another door and returned a moment later with a cup of water and a piece of bread. She handed them to him without speaking. Why are you helping me? Xavier asked. She met his eyes, and in them he saw something familiar. Grief. The kind that had carved out hollow places inside a person and made them into something else. Because I know what it looks like when a man has lost everything, she said. And because those men are vultures, I have no love for their kind. Xavier drank the water. It was cool and sweet. What's your name? Sarah Whitmore. I run this store with my father-in-law. She paused. Or I did. He died last month. Heart gave out. Now it is just me. Your husband, dead. 2 years. She said it flatly, as if the weight of it had been pressed into something hard and smooth through repetition. Typhoid took him and our son both within 3 days of each other. James was 26. Our boy was 4. The words hung in the air between them. Xavier set down the cup. I lost my wife last year, to the fever. Sarah nodded slowly. Then you understand. Yes. They sat in silence, and it was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who had walked through the same dark valley and recognized each other as survivors. Xavier had not felt understood like this since Mary died. Everyone else either pitied him or avoided him as if grief were contagious. But Sarah looked at him and saw someone who knew. What is your name? She asked finally. Xavier Crawford. What did you do, Xavier Crawford, to have bounty hunters chase you into my town? I did not pay a man who claimed I owed him money for medicine he sold me for my wife. Medicine that did nothing. She died anyway, and he wanted $300. I told him to go to hell. Xavier's voice was bitter. Apparently he took that personally. Sarah's expression did not change, but something softened in her eyes. Men like that profit from desperation. He had no right. Try telling that to the 3 men with guns hunting me. How much do you have left? Bullets, I mean. 4. She stood and went to a cupboard, opened it, and pulled out a box of ammunition. She tossed it to him. There, now you have more. Xavier caught it, surprised. I cannot pay you for this. I did not ask you to. She returned to the desk and sat on its edge, arms crossed. Those men will search the town until dark, then they will probably camp and wait for morning. They will watch the roads. You cannot leave the way you came. I know. There is a trail through the mountains east of here. It is rough, but a good horse can manage it. It will take you toward Richfield. From there you can go anywhere. She paused. Your horse is at the saloon. Yes. What does it look like? Xavier described his bay gelding, and Sarah nodded. I will have someone bring it around after dark. You can leave from here without being seen. Why are you doing all this? She looked at him for a long moment. Because for 2 years I have been going through the motions of living without feeling alive. Because I understand what it is like to be hunted by grief worse than any bounty hunter. And because maybe helping you helps me remember what it feels like to care about something. Her voice cracked slightly on the last words, and she looked away. Xavier stood and crossed to her. He did not touch her, but he stood close enough that she could feel he was there. I am sorry for your loss, and I for yours. They stayed like that, 2 broken people in a dusty storeroom in Utah, and for the first time in over a year, Xavier felt something other than emptiness. It was not happiness. It was too soon and too fragile for that. But it was connection, and that was something. The afternoon stretched into evening. Sarah brought him food, a proper meal of stew and biscuits that she had made in the small kitchen attached to the store. They ate together, talking in quiet voices. She told him about her husband James, who had been kind and gentle, a blacksmith with clever hands and a good heart. She told him about their son William, who had loved horses and had wanted to be a cowboy. Xavier told her about Mary, about how they had met in St. Louis and married young, about the daughter they had lost, and how Mary had never quite recovered from that grief. She stopped smiling as much after Elizabeth died, Xavier said. It was like a light went out inside her. And then the fever came, and it was almost like she did not fight it, like she was ready to go. Sarah reached across the table and put her hand on his. Her fingers were warm and calloused from work. You cannot blame yourself for that, I know, but I do anyway. I blamed myself too, for months. I thought if I had called the doctor sooner, if I had prayed harder, if I had been a better wife. But the truth is that death comes when it comes, and we are just the ones left behind to make sense of it. She squeezed his hand. That does not mean it hurts less. No, it does not. Darkness fell, and with it came the sound of footsteps outside. Sarah tensed, but they passed by. She went to the window and peered through the cracks. They are still searching. Xavier stood beside her. He could see the silhouettes of men moving through the street, lanterns in hand. They are persistent. Greed makes men persistent. An hour later, there was a soft knock on the back door. Sarah opened it to reveal a young man, perhaps 17, holding the reins of Xavier's horse. "Found him where you said, Miss Sarah," the boy whispered. "Nobody saw me." "Thank you, Peter." She pressed a coin into his hand, and he disappeared into the night. Xavier checked his horse, relieved to find his saddlebag still intact. He reloaded his gun with the ammunition Sarah had given him and checked his rifle. Everything was in order. He turned to Sarah, who stood in the doorway, her face half in shadow. "I do not know how to thank you," he said. "Then do not. Just survive. Make it count." She paused. "Where will you go?" "I do not know. Somewhere those men will not find me." "That is not much of a plan. It is all I have." Sarah stepped closer. In the moonlight, her eyes were dark, searching. "You could stay." Xavier's heart stuttered. "What? Stay? Here in Marysvale you could work. I need help with the store, and there is always work on the ranches nearby. You could build a life here." Her voice was uncertain, vulnerable in a way he sensed she rarely allowed herself to be. "I know we just met, but I feel like I know you, like I have been waiting to meet someone who understands." Xavier wanted to say yes. God, how he wanted to, but he shook his head. "Those men will not stop looking. If I stay, I put you in danger." "I can handle danger, Sarah." He took her hands in his. "You saved my life tonight. I will not repay that by bringing violence to your door." Tears shone in her eyes, but she did not let them fall. "Then what?" "You just ride away and I never see you again." "I do not know." "That is not good enough." Her voice was fierce now. "I have spent 2 years alone, Xavier. 2 years of waking up in an empty bed and running this store by myself and pretending that I am fine. And tonight, for the first time, I felt something. I felt like maybe there was a reason to keep going beyond just surviving. And you are going to tell me that is not worth fighting for." Xavier's chest ached. "I am not saying it is not worth it. I am saying I do not know how." "Then figure it out." She pulled her hands free and stepped back. "Go, take the mountain trail, stay alive. But if you do, if you survive this, come back to me. Sarah, promise me." He looked at her, this woman who had appeared in his life like grace, unexpected and undeserved. He thought about riding away into the darkness alone, thought about the empty days and nights that stretched ahead. He thought about Mary, about the promise he had made to her to keep living even after she was gone. And he thought about Sarah, brave and broken and still willing to hope. "I promise," he said. She kissed him then, quick and fierce, and then she pushed him toward his horse. "Go, before I change my mind and lock you in the storeroom forever." Xavier mounted up, his heart pounding. He looked down at her one last time. "I will come back. You better." He rode into the night, following the trail Sarah had told him about. It was narrow and treacherous, winding up through the foothills of the mountains. The moon was bright enough to see by, but just barely. He kept his horse at a careful pace, trusting the animal's instincts. Behind him, Marysvale disappeared, its few lights swallowed by the darkness. The ride took all night. By dawn, Xavier was miles away, high in the mountains with the valley spread below him like a map. He could see the smoke from Marysvale's chimneys, could trace the road he had ridden in on. There was no sign of pursuit. Sarah had been right about this trail. It was hidden, known only to locals. Xavier made camp in a grove of pines and let his horse rest. He ate some jerky from his saddlebags and thought about what came next. He could not go back to Denver. He could not stay in Utah with bounty hunters looking for him. But he had made a promise, and Xavier Crawford kept his promises. He spent 3 days in the mountains, working his way east and then south, circling wide around Marysvale. On the 4th day, he rode into Richfield, a larger town with a sheriff's office. It was a risk, but a calculated one. He tied up his horse and walked into the office. The sheriff was a big man with a gray beard and hard eyes. He looked Xavier up and down. "Help you?" "I want to report a crime," Xavier said. "A man in Denver named Marcus Thorne is sending bounty hunters after innocent people. He is claiming debts that do not exist and using violence to collect." The sheriff leaned back in his chair. "That is a serious accusation. It is the truth. He sold me fake medicine and tried to charge me $300 for it. When I refused, he sent men to kill me." "You got proof?" Xavier pulled out the bottle of medicine which he had kept. It is just colored water and alcohol, nothing that would cure fever." The sheriff took the bottle, examined it, and set it on his desk. "And you are who, exactly?" "Xavier Crawford. I am from Denver originally, but I have been traveling. My wife died last year, and Thorne took advantage of that. I am not the only one. If you send a wire to Denver, ask around about him, you will find others." The sheriff studied him for a long moment. "You could be lying. I could be, but I am not." Something in Xavier's tone must have convinced him because the sheriff nodded. "I will look into it. Where can I reach you?" Xavier hesitated. "I will be in Marysvale at Whitmore's general store." "All right. Give me 2 weeks. If what you are saying checks out, I will handle it. If it does not, I will come looking for you myself." "Fair enough." Xavier left the office feeling lighter. It was not much, but it was a start. If the sheriff investigated and found the truth, maybe the bounty would be lifted. Maybe he could stop running. He rode back toward Marysvale, but he did not go into town. Instead, he camped in the hills above it, watching. He saw the bounty hunters leave on the 3rd day, their search apparently given up. He waited 2 more days to be sure, and then he rode in. It was late afternoon when he tied his horse in front of the general store. His hands were shaking. He had no idea if Sarah had meant what she said, if she had changed her mind, if she would even want to see him. But he pushed open the door and stepped inside. The store was empty except for Sarah, who stood behind the counter, writing in the ledger. She looked up at the sound of the bell and her eyes widened. "Xavier, I came back." She set down her pen very carefully. "I see that. The bounty hunters are gone. I went to the sheriff in Richfield and he is investigating. It will take time, but I think it will work out." "That is good." They stared at each other across the store. Xavier felt like a fool. "I know it has only been a week. I know I have no right to just come back here and expect anything, but I made you a promise and I keep my promises." Sarah walked around the counter. She moved slowly, deliberately, until she was standing right in front of him. "I thought about you every day," she said. "I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I had known you for a few hours and that did not mean anything. But it did, it does. It does, Xavier agreed. So what now? Now I stay if you will have me. I find work. I build a life. And I spend every day proving to you that coming back was the right choice. Sarah smiled, and it was like sunrise. That sounds like a good plan. Xavier pulled her into his arms, and she came willingly, her head against his chest. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other, two people who had lost everything and somehow found each other. The weeks turned into months. Xavier found work at a ranch outside town, breaking horses and mending fences. It was hard work, but good work, the kind that made him sleep soundly at night. He rented a room at the boarding house and spent his evenings at the store, helping Sarah with inventory and repairs. They talked for hours, sharing stories about their lost spouses, their grief, their slow journey back toward something like hope. They were cautious with each other at first, both of them aware that what they were building was fragile. But gradually, trust grew. Xavier found himself laughing again, really laughing, at something Sarah said. Sarah started singing while she worked, old songs she had not sung since James died. They went on walks in the evenings, up into the hills where the air was cool and clear, and they talked about the future in tentative, careful terms. The sheriff in Richfield sent word after 2 months. He had investigated Marcus Thorne and found evidence of fraud and extortion. Thorne had been arrested, and the bounties he had issued were void. Xavier was free. He rode to Richfield to give a statement, and when he returned to Marysvale, he went straight to the store. Sarah was closing up for the day, pulling down the shades. She turned when he entered, a question in her eyes. "It is over," Xavier said. "The bounty is lifted. Thorne is in jail." Sarah's face lit up. "That is wonderful. It means I can stop looking over my shoulder. It means I can really stay." She crossed to him and took his hands. "Is that what you want, to stay?" "Only if you want me to. Xavier Crawford, I have wanted you to stay since the moment you rode away." She laughed, a little breathless. "I have been terrified you would decide to leave, that you would realize you did not need me or this town or any of it." "I need you," Xavier said quietly. "I did not think I would ever need anyone again after Mary died, but I need you. You make me feel alive again." Sarah kissed him, soft and sweet, and Xavier felt the last of the walls around his heart crumble. When they pulled apart, her eyes were shining. "I need you too. These months with you have been the happiest I have had in years. I did not think I could be happy again, but I am. So we do this. We really do this. We do this." Xavier courted her properly after that, because even in the rough Utah Territory in 1878 there were standards. He brought her flowers from the hills, wildflowers that grew in purple and gold clusters. He took her to the church social, where they danced to a fiddle player and ate pie made by the church ladies. He sat with her on her porch in the evenings, and they watched the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in colors that had no names. People in town talked, of course. Two widowed people finding comfort in each other so soon was fodder for gossip. But Xavier and Sarah did not care. They had both lived through loss profound enough that the opinions of bored neighbors meant nothing. They knew what they had, and they protected it fiercely. Xavier proposed in December, 6 months after he had first ridden into Marysvale. They were in the store, and snow was falling outside, the first real storm of winter. Sarah was showing him the new stock that had arrived from Salt Lake City, and Xavier suddenly could not wait any longer. "Marry me," he said. Sarah turned, a bolt of fabric in her hands. "What? Marry me, Sarah?" "I do not have a ring yet, and I know I should have planned this better, but I do not want to wait. I want to spend my life with you. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build something real and lasting with you." He took a breath. "I know we both lost people we loved. I know we carry that grief, and we always will. but I also know that we have a chance at something good here, something worth fighting for. So marry me." Sarah set down the fabric. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling. "Yes, yes, of course, yes." Xavier whooped and spun her around, and she laughed, the sound echoing through the store. They were married in January of 1879, in the small church in Marysville. It was a simple ceremony, attended by the townspeople who had come to accept them. Sarah wore a dress she had made herself, a beautiful thing of cream-colored silk, and Xavier wore his best suit, brushed and mended for the occasion. The preacher spoke about love and loss, about the courage it took to open one's heart again after grief. Xavier held Sarah's hands and looked into her eyes, and he made promises he intended to keep for the rest of his life. To love her, to honor her, to stand beside her through whatever came. Sarah made the same promises back, her voice strong and clear. They moved into the rooms above the store, combining their lives in practical and profound ways. Xavier brought his few possessions, mostly books and tools, and Sarah made space for them among her things. They learned each other's habits and rhythms. Sarah liked to rise early and make coffee before the sun came up. Xavier liked to read at night by lamplight. They both had nightmares sometimes, waking gasping from dreams of fever and loss, and they learned to comfort each other through those dark moments. Spring came, and with it new life. Sarah discovered she was pregnant in April, and the news filled them both with a complicated mix of joy and fear. They had both lost children before. They knew how fragile life was, but they chose hope anyway, chose to believe that this child would live and thrive. Xavier became protective to the point of absurdity. He did not want Sarah lifting anything heavy, did not want her working too hard. She tolerated it with good humor for a while, and then she sat him down and said, "I am pregnant, not made of glass. I know how to take care of myself. I know that. I just worry. I worry too, but we cannot live in fear, Xavier. We have to trust that things will work out." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "This baby deserves better than parents who are terrified all the time." "You are right," he sighed. "I am sorry. I just cannot lose anyone else." "You will not. We are going to be fine." And they were. Sarah's pregnancy progressed without complication. Her belly grew round and she glowed with health. The townspeople rallied around them, the women bringing baby clothes and advice, the men offering to help with anything Xavier needed. It was a kind of community Xavier had not experienced before, and it moved him deeply. In November of 1879, Sarah went into labor. It was a long, difficult night, and Xavier paced the floor downstairs while the midwife and 2 other women attended to Sarah upstairs. He prayed more that night than he had in years, bargaining with God, promising anything if Sarah and the baby would just be all right. Just before dawn, he heard a baby cry. Xavier's knees went weak with relief. He sank into a chair and put his head in his hands. A few minutes later, the midwife came down, smiling. "You have a son," she said, "and your wife is fine, tired but fine." Xavier took the stairs 2 at a time. Sarah was propped up in bed, her hair damp with sweat, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked exhausted and radiant. Xavier knelt beside the bed and looked at his son. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled with a shock of dark hair. He was perfect. "Hello, little one," Xavier whispered. Sarah smiled. "We need to name him." They had discussed names, of course, but had not decided. Xavier looked at his wife and son, at the family he had thought he would never have again, and he felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "What about Thomas?" "After your father." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Her father had died before she met Xavier, but she had told him stories, and Xavier knew how much she had loved him. "Thomas, that is perfect." Thomas Crawford was a healthy, hungry baby who kept them up at all hours. Xavier walked the floor with him in the middle of the night, singing old songs his own mother had sung to him. Sarah nursed him and changed him and marveled at every tiny detail. They were exhausted and overwhelmed and happier than they had thought possible. The months passed in a blur of feeding and diapers and sleepless nights. Thomas grew, his red face filling out, his eyes turning the same green as his mother's. He smiled at 8 weeks, laughed at 3 months, and by 6 months he was sitting up and trying to grab everything in reach. Life in Marysville continued around them. The store did well, providing a steady income. Xavier continued to work at the ranch, though less now that he had a family to care for. They settled into a rhythm, a life built on small joys and shared labor. They still had hard days when grief ambushed them unexpectedly. Sarah sometimes wept for William, her first son, wishing he could meet his little brother. Xavier sometimes dreamed of Mary and woke with an ache in his chest. But they weathered those moments together, holding each other, reminding each other that love and loss could coexist. Thomas took his first steps on his first birthday, wobbling across the floor of the store into Xavier's arms. Sarah clapped and laughed, and Xavier felt a surge of pride so strong it nearly knocked him over. This was his son, his family, his life. When Thomas was 2, Sarah became pregnant again. This time, she did not tell Xavier for a month, wanting to be sure. When she finally did, Xavier reacted with the same mix of joy and fear as before, and Sarah gave him the same speech about not living in fear. They were older now, wiser. They knew the risks, but they also knew that life was worth the risk. Their daughter was born in the summer of 1882, during a heat wave that made the store feel like an oven. The birth was easier this time, quicker. Sarah labored for only a few hours before their daughter arrived, screaming her indignation at the world. Xavier held her and fell instantly in love. She had wisps of auburn hair like her mother and a stubborn set to her jaw that promised trouble. "What should we call her?" Sarah asked, tired but smiling. "Grace," Xavier said. "Because that is what she is, Grace." Sarah nodded. "Grace Crawford, I love it." Grace was a different baby than Thomas had been. Where he had been calm and content, she was fierce and demanding. She knew what she wanted and hollered until she got it. Xavier adored her. He carried her everywhere, showing her the world, telling her stories. Thomas, now a toddler, was fascinated by his baby sister. He brought her toys and patted her head gently, saying "baby, baby" over and over. The years rolled on, measured in birthdays and holidays and the slow, steady growth of children. Thomas started school in 1884, walking to the one-room schoolhouse with the other children. He was bright and curious, always asking questions. Grace followed him everywhere, determined to keep up despite being 3 years younger. They fought and played and loved each other with the intensity only siblings could manage. Xavier and Sarah's love deepened with time. They had built a life together from the ashes of their grief, and every day was a testament to that. They still ran the store, though they had hired help now. Xavier had bought a small piece of land on the edge of town, and he was building them a house. It was slow work, done in his spare time, but it was coming together. A real home with enough room for their growing family. In 1886, when Thomas was 7 and Grace was 4, Xavier finished the house. It was not grand, but it was solid and well built, with 3 bedrooms and a big kitchen and a porch that wrapped around the front. They moved in on a bright October day, the children running through the rooms and claiming their spaces. Sarah stood in the kitchen, looking out the window at the mountains, and Xavier came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think it is perfect," she said. "I think we are home." Xavier kissed her temple. I love you too." That night, after the children were asleep, Xavier and Sarah sat on the porch and watched the stars come out. The air was cool and smelled of sage and wood smoke. Xavier thought about the day he had ridden into Marysvale, running from bounty hunters, broken and alone. He thought about Sarah pulling him into the storeroom, saving his life in more ways than one. He thought about how she had seen him, really seen him, and understood his pain because she carried her own. "You ever think about them?" Sarah asked quietly. "Mary and James?" "Sometimes," Xavier said. "Less than I used to. Not because I have forgotten, but because the grief is not as sharp. It is like a scar now instead of a wound. I think about them too. I think they would be happy for us. I think they would want us to have this. I think so too." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder. "We were so broken when we met. We were, but we put each other back together piece by piece. And look at us now." Xavier smiled. "Look at us now." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had survived the worst and found each other on the other side. They had not forgotten their first loves, would carry those memories always. But they had created something new, something beautiful. A family built on understanding and shared pain and the courage to love again. Inside the house, Thomas called out in his sleep, and Grace murmured something back. The sounds of children, safe and loved. Xavier stood and pulled Sarah to her feet. "Come on, let us go check on them." They walked inside together, hand in hand, into the house they had built, the life they had made. The future stretched ahead, unknown and full of possibility. There would be challenges, of course. There always were. But they would face them together as they had faced everything else. Years continued to pass in the steady rhythm of life in a small Utah town. Thomas grew tall and strong, inheriting his father's height and his mother's quick mind. He took an interest in the store, learning the business from Sarah, showing a natural aptitude for numbers and negotiation. Grace was wild and fearless, climbing trees and racing horses, and giving her parents gray hairs with her antics. Xavier pretended to be stern with her, but Sarah knew better. Grace could wrap her father around her little finger with a smile. In 1890, tragedy struck the town when a fire broke out in the livery stable. Xavier was one of the men who fought it, passing buckets and pulling terrified horses from the flames. He came home that night covered in soot and ash, and Sarah had washed him tenderly, checking him for burns. He was fine, just exhausted, but the incident reminded them both how fragile life was, how quickly things could change. They held their children a little tighter that night. Thomas graduated from school in 1891 at 14, having learned all the schoolteacher could offer. He began working full-time at the store, and Xavier was proud of the young man his son was becoming. Thomas was responsible and hardworking, kind to customers, patient with his little sister. He had a sweetheart, a girl named Rebecca from one of the ranching families, and Xavier teased him gently about it while Sarah planned for a future wedding. Grace started school herself, though she chafed at the restrictions. She wanted to be outside, riding horses and exploring the hills. But she was clever, and once she realized that reading opened up whole worlds, she threw herself into it. By age 7, she was reading everything she could get her hands on, from dime novels to newspapers to the Bible. In 1893, Sarah became pregnant again, a surprise at 39. The pregnancy was harder than the previous two, and Xavier worried constantly. But Sarah was determined, and in the spring of 1894, she delivered a healthy baby boy. They named him Daniel, and he was the most even-tempered of all their children, content to sit and observe the world around him. Thomas was 15 now, Grace 11. They doted on their baby brother, taking turns holding him and playing with him. The house was full of noise and life, and Xavier often stopped in the middle of whatever he was doing just to take it in. This was what he had lost when Mary died, and he had been certain he would never have it again. But here it was, given back to him in abundance. Sarah sometimes ached with all the love she felt, the gratitude that threatened to overflow. She had lost so much, and somehow life had given her so much more. She watched Xavier with their children and felt overwhelmed. He was such a good father, patient and present, never too busy or too tired. He played with them and taught them and loved them with his whole heart. In 1896, Thomas married Rebecca in the church in Marysvale. He was 18, she was 17, and they were deeply in love. Xavier stood beside his son and thought about his own wedding to Mary all those years ago, about the hopes and dreams they had had. Some of those dreams had been shattered, but others had been reborn in new forms. Thomas and Rebecca moved into a small house near the store, and Thomas continued to work there, eventually taking over much of the daily management. Grace at 13 was turning into a beauty, tall and graceful despite her tomboy ways. She had her mother's auburn hair and her father's determination. She announced that she wanted to be a doctor, which was unheard of for a girl in rural Utah in 1896, but Sarah and Xavier did not laugh. They knew their daughter, knew that if anyone could do it, Grace could. Daniel grew into a sweet-natured toddler, curious and gentle. He followed Xavier everywhere, wanting to help with everything his father did. Xavier taught him to hammer nails and care for horses and be kind to people. Daniel soaked it all up, his small face serious with concentration. In 1898, Thomas and Rebecca had their first child, a girl they named Anna. Xavier became a grandfather at 43, and the role suited him. He bounced Anna on his knee and sang her the same songs he had sung to his own children. Sarah sewed tiny dresses for her granddaughter and felt her heart expand even more. The cycle of life continued, grief and loss balanced by joy and new beginnings. Grace left for medical school in 1900, heading east to a women's medical college in Pennsylvania. It was a tearful goodbye. Sarah wept openly, and Xavier's eyes were suspiciously bright. But they were proud of her, this fierce daughter of theirs who refused to accept limitations. She wrote home regularly, long letters full of her studies and her determination to come back and practice medicine in Utah. Daniel started school, and Xavier found himself with more free time than he had had in years. He and Sarah took long walks in the evenings, just the two of them, rediscovering the quiet intimacy they had first found in those early days. They talked about their life, about their children and grandchildren, about how far they had come. "You remember the day we met?" Sarah asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "Every detail," Xavier said. "You pulled me into that storeroom and saved my life. You were running from bounty hunters. You looked terrified. I was, but you looked at me and saw past all that. You saw me." He took her hand. "I did not think I would ever feel seen again after Mary died, but you did. You understood, because I had been there." "I knew what it was like to lose everything," Sarah smiled. "And look at what we built from that loss." Xavier looked out at the town of Marysvale, at the house he had built, at the life they had created. "We built something good. We did." Thomas and Rebecca had 2 more children in the following years, boys they named John and Peter. The store continued to prosper under Thomas's management, and Xavier officially retired in 1902, though he still helped out when needed. He was 57, Sarah was 52, and they had earned their rest. Grace returned in 1904, a certified doctor, and set up practice in Marysvale. She was the first female doctor in the county, and while some people were skeptical at first, she quickly proved herself. She was skilled and compassionate, and she saved lives. Xavier and Sarah could not have been prouder. Daniel grew into a quiet, thoughtful young man, interested in ranching. He apprenticed with one of the larger spreads and showed real talent with cattle and horses. He was 20 in 1914, and Xavier saw so much of himself in his youngest son. The same steady reliability, the same careful competence. The years of their later life were peaceful. Xavier and Sarah spent their days together, working in the garden, visiting their children and grandchildren, being part of the community they had helped build. They went to church on Sundays and celebrated holidays with their ever-growing family. They sat on their porch in the evenings and watched the world go by, content in the knowledge that they had lived well. In 1920, they celebrated their 41st wedding anniversary. The whole family gathered at the house for a party. Thomas and Rebecca were there with their 3 children, all adults now. Anna was married with children of her own. Grace was there, unmarried by choice, devoted to her practice. Daniel was there with his new wife, a sweet girl named Elizabeth. The house was full of noise and laughter and love. Xavier stood at the edge of the gathering watching. Sarah came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. They were both older now, gray-haired and slower, but still together, still in love. "Can you believe this?" Sarah asked. "All of this from such dark beginnings." "I can believe it because I lived it," Xavier said, "because you made me believe it was possible. We made each other believe." Xavier turned to face her, taking both her hands. "I love you, Sarah Crawford. I have loved you from the moment you pulled me into that storeroom, and I will love you until my last breath." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too. You gave me back my life when I thought it was over. You gave me a reason to hope again." They kissed, soft and gentle, a kiss that held 41 years of history and love. Around them, their family cheered and applauded, and Xavier and Sarah laughed. This was their happily ever after. Not perfect, not without scars, but real and hard-won and precious. They had both known grief, had both lost people they loved. But they had found each other in that grief, had understood each other's pain, and from that understanding had built something beautiful and lasting. As the sun set over Marysvale on that anniversary evening, Xavier and Sarah stood surrounded by their children, their grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The house they had built was full of love and laughter. The life they had created from the ashes of loss was thriving. They had survived. More than that, they had lived, and they had done it together.